Before we dive into the ISD process, let's consider what learning is. So learning, what exactly is it? Many might agree that learning is a process by which new information gained results in a change. It's an ongoing process that increases one's ability to improve and gain experience over time through persistent application. Learning is a multi-step process that requires one to pay close attention to the information received, synthesize it with what is already known, store it in their mind, and apply it. As facilitators of learning, our role is critical to the adoption of new knowledge for our students. They look to us to help them make sense of instruction that they can apply to their lives and the lives of others. Aspects of a student's journey through life may very well fall under our guidance as a facilitator of their learning. Quite frankly, learning leads to transformation. What an incredible opportunity we have as a facilitator of learning to create lasting change in others. So what is instructional design? In its simplest terms, instructional design is when we analyze problems, try to ascertain the reasons for them, and propose solutions to them through developing, designing, and facilitating training programs or resources. The three things that strike me the most about instructional design are: there is always a solution to the problem if you're willing to dig for it. 2, following a systems approach removes the uncertainty of where to begin, how to proceed, and how to stay on a project path to completion. And 3, for learning to stick, it must be practiced, applied, and put into muscle memory, regardless of one's learning style. Let's consider what the goal of learning is. The goal of any learning experiences should be mastery of content. So how do we get there? There are a variety of ISD models to use. Many instructional designers use the Aide system. This is my favorite of all the learning models and is my go-to. It provides me with the logical steps to form a sequence that progresses into a solid design plan. The model helps me to chunk the overwhelming task of developing an entire course down into manageable bite-sized chunks. I like following one step at a time, digging into it with as much focus as possible, then moving on to the next step. Before long, all 5 steps have been developed and follow a logical progression towards the ultimate goal, which is to develop learning that matters and has meat to it. Aide is the most prominent and field-tested ISD model out there, and it consists of 5 elements: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. Analysis is the data gathering element for this model. Design is where designers create the roadmap or building blocks for the project. This is the phase where objectives and content are written. Development includes the production of materials and pilot testing. This is when the design comes to life. Implementation is when the content is delivered to the learner. Evaluation is a segment of this part of the Aide model, as many knowledge checkpoints, quizzes, feedback sessions take place while delivering the actual content. Finally, evaluation. Evaluation actually occurs throughout the Aide model in all phases. This is when a designer determines the process by which mastery of content occurs. So let's talk in more depth about analysis first. The first step in the analysis process is to identify the problem. This is written as a problem statement. The purpose of the problem statement is to identify and define the issue in a way that allows it to be studied in a systematic way. An example of a problem statement is: the ABC Literary Society has insufficient funds coming in to help them fund the organization. The second step in the analysis process is the performance gap analysis. In a performance gap analysis, the designer sets out to set the foundation of the problem by offering a background on the problem, determining and applying research methods to uncover the problem further, specifically to address current state, desired state, and the delta difference state. Here's an example of a performance gap analysis. The desired state is $45,500. The current state is $20,500. The delta difference between this is $25,000. Now, the third step in the analysis is the root cause analysis. In the root cause analysis, the designer's goal is to uncover areas that are causing the problem. To uncover the root causes, a designer would embark on research such as interviews, questionnaires, focus groups, and data review. A designer would typically break the root cause factors down into categories like knowledge, structure and process, information, and physical resources as examples. Here is an example of a set of root cause findings based on these categories. Knowledge category. Board members and volunteers don't know how to find an audience of potential donors. Structure and process category. Board members and volunteers don't have a clear understanding of the donation objectives. Information category. Donors don't have a way of knowing where their donation dollars go. And finally, physical resources. Board members and volunteers don't have a mechanism in place to create connections with potential donors. The fourth step in analysis is the front-end analysis. In the front-end analysis, the goal of the designer is to determine that training is necessary. This is when a designer takes all the findings from the root cause analysis research and suggests recommendations to solve those issues. Now, not all findings will require a training recommendation. That's the whole point of this step in the analysis process, is to find those issues where training would be the right solution to solve the problem. An example of a finding and recommendation for training looks like this. Knowledge category, finding number 1. Board members and volunteers don't know how to find an audience of potential donors. Recommendation, training. Create a job aid that lists at least 10 ways volunteers and board members can find an audience of potential donors. The fifth step in analysis is the training needs analysis. In the training needs analysis, the designer's goal is to determine the competency gaps of the organization and how best to address them through training. The designer creates a research plan that includes input sources like specific data, survey of a particular audience, the purpose of input, and the method by which these sources are collected. For example, interview, extant data review, focus group interviews. Once the designer performs the training needs analysis, they will analyze the data and make recommendations on the findings. An example of a finding in its training recommendation looks like this. Survey finding number 1, there is a lack of knowledge on best practices for fundraising. Recommendation, create a top 10 best practices job aid handout to help board members and volunteers take the best actions when it comes to their fundraising efforts. The sixth step in this analysis process is the design plan. The goal of the design plan is to create a plan that bridges the gap between the analysis work and the implementation of the training. It is a blueprint that uncovers pertinent details of the training needs analysis and helps a designer develop training in a systematic manner. Design plan elements typically include the rationale, the target population, the course description, terminal and enabling objectives, evaluation strategy, participant and facilitator recs, and deliverables. Terminal objectives are usually written in the ABCD format. They should be SMART, which means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. And then you have enabling objectives. Enabling objectives are learning objectives that support the terminal objective. The evaluation plan, let's talk about that. Kirkpatrick is a very popular way to evaluate. Kirkpatrick has 4 levels. Reaction, which are smile sheets, learner's experience, immediate control data. These are all collected during the event, and they are collected at the individual level. Level 2 is learning. This is collected at the individual level as well. Usually we use quizzes, observation, and we're trying to measure the degree to which the objectives were achieved. Level 3, behavior. This is typically collected after the learning event in the form of audits, observation, quizzes, and we measure the transfer of learning. It measures the degree to which the behavior changes as a result of the new knowledge or skill. And finally, level 4 are the results. This is your ROI. It's collected at the organizational level, and it's after the learning event through audits, observations, quizzes. We're trying to measure the ROI, the return on investment. So those are the different phases of analysis in the Aide system. Let's dig deeper into the design aspect, specifically when we're talking about writing objectives. Behavioral objectives. They should be measurable. And if they're not measurable, they're simply goals. Measurable objectives ensure either mastery has been met or hasn't been. Mastery should be the ultimate goal for students. So how do you write behavioral objectives? There are 4 parts to a behavioral objective. The most common elements are audience, behavior, condition, and degree. The audience element is used to specify who the end user of the course design is going to be. An example of how you would write an audience would be the ICP learner. Audience is the most often ignored element of behavioral objectives, but it is actually a key to making sure that we have correctly identified who we are teaching. While this seems like a small design consideration, it forces us to focus on the end user and make sure that we have allowed for variations in population that might be better served by more than one version of a course. The behavior element specifies the specifics of what we expect each learner to be able to do at the end of the course. This should be measurable and observable, and should be written as should be able to or will be able to. Here's an example of how this might look. Should be able to list safety equipment needed for a specific task. You should never use words like learn, understand, or any verb that is not observable and measurable, since there is no way to evaluate these for mastery. The conditions element are what's given to learners to support their mastery of the objective. Here's what an example of this might look like. Given a lecture. Now, common tangible items include books, handouts, and computers. Common procedural items include demonstrations, role plays, discussions, lectures, and presentations. Remember that conditions are the key element in assuring that learners are given the learning tools and process necessary to assure mastery. The degree element represents the mastery level expected of each learner when evaluated. It will state how and to what degree a learner will be expected to demonstrate mastery. An example might look like this. Here is how it would look broken into the 4 elements. Let's talk about performance agreement as it relates to design. Now, performance agreement considers the behavior and degree elements of an objective. It asks the designer, what is the learner expected to be able to do by the end of the course? And how will you assess for mastery? It's important to question whether the behavior and degree elements of the assessment of mastery are consistent with the original objective. Performance agreement is critical because when mastery is determined in a way that doesn't match the original intent of an objective, there is no validity in the learning that the student receives. So as you can see, there's a lot to cover in ISD to ensure learners meet mastery. When a designer takes their time going through the process, the outcome will surely favor the learner's experience. And isn't that the whole goal? To favor and enhance the skills and knowledge of our learners?